Welcome to the opening of our conference, Owning Spaces, Conversations and Actions from Bed. My name is Kate Marsh. I am a white crip woman in her mid-40s. I have long brownish hair tied up in a bun tonight. I'm wearing a yellow t-shirt and I'm sitting up in bed, propped up by a big cushion. I'm an artist researcher based in the UK.
And I'm Noa Winter. I'm a white, queer, disabled, chronically ill curator based in Berlin, Germany. And today I'm lying down on my bed with lots of cushions. I call this bed also my bed office, because if you have seen me on Zoom during the last 2 years, you might have seen me on this bed. I'm wearing a black dress and a black blouse, and red lipstick. I'm also working for Making a Difference, and this conference is part of Making a Difference. For those of you who don't know what Making a Difference is, we are a Berlin-based project that seeks to empower disabled and deaf artists, especially in the dance scene. Besides curating this conference with Kate, I'm leading on all of the project's activities. So for example, workshops, residencies, and co-production together with my colleague Anne Rieger. Yes, and Kate and I are very happy to welcome you today to the opening of this 5-day conference, which is just an incredible opportunity to bring together local and international arts workers, activists, and audiences, and to vivify the connections and collaborations between individuals and communities. I think it's you, Kate.
It had to happen at some point that I would be muted. So just a note on the conference overall that Noa and I and the wider team are aware of multiple forms of discrimination. We do not allow any kind of discriminating behaviour, for example, ableism, racism, transphobia. We reserve the right to remove individuals who behave in a discriminatory manner and ban them from all further events. You can always contact Noa or our tech support if you experience discrimination throughout these days. Please also respect that language can be diverse. We would like you to respect the language we all choose to identify, for example, pronouns, but also use of disability language and why, for example, what we mean by crip. Noa and I identify with a crip identity. We agree that we find it an empowering word that enables us to locate ourselves in communities of activism and ways of being in the world that do not try to conform to ableist norms. And this is a term that will be used by us and others throughout the conference. We respectfully understand that this term is not used by all of us and that there is an ongoing discourse around its use.
This conference is also a relaxed space. So there are no expectations, no dress code, but instead a warm welcome from our side for all kinds of non-normative ways of being in this space. We invited you to join from your beds, your workspaces, studios, your bathtubs, your gardens, basically from anywhere where you feel comfortable, and because it's this digital world here where you have internet access. And we definitely want to give the permission to you all, or ask you to give yourself the permission to rest during this conference. So surround yourself with lots of cushions, a warm blanket, a cup of tea, your stimming toys, your knitting, your cat, and take a break whenever you need it. You don't need to apologize. You don't need to explain anything. Just do what you need to take care of yourself. This space is for you. Take your time. Also, in this space, access is a priority. Of course, we need to acknowledge that on the one hand, already this digital format of the conference is creating barriers for some people. But on the other hand, I'm really happy when I'm looking into the room to see some people who wouldn't be able to access the conference if it was happening remotely in Berlin. We know that we won't be able to meet all access needs equally at all times, but if there is an access issue, please let us know. We want to know and we want to find a solution together. This also, relates a lot to how Kate and I met and how we work together. Because when Kate and I first met at the theater studies conference back in 2018, that was an event where access was definitely not a priority, but an issue, a problem. After many hours of research and communication spent on finding out if I actually can access this conference instead of working on my presentation, navigating the whole conference continued to be stressful, inaccessible, not a very nice experience. So you can really imagine these two crips, Kate and me, meeting at a stand-up buffet with finger food. So a decent amount of the food ended up on the floor. Being the only disabled people in the room, even later in this conference on a panel about disability performance, surrounded by non-disabled people, created for us a very particular form of kinship that many of you in this room might know. And it is actually this bond that started at this very inaccessible conference that we built on the curation for this conference.
Thank you, Noa. And I love that reminder that we met when I dropped my canapé on your foot. So, in our conversations and exchanges about how typical or normative or ableist conferences make us feel, like we're often on the edges or a problem to be dealt with. And this had a real impact on how we felt included, and more importantly, as Noa has already mentioned, on our ability to privilege our ideas, our thinking, and our practice within these normative contexts. In our discussions and planning, we wanted to create a space in this conference where access was prioritised and curated with sensitivity. It has been a central aim for us to make a conference where we and the communities we live and work in would feel a sense of ownership.
So part of our thinking about this conference was always this question, who this kind of events are actually for. So are they for us? Often not really, because if a disability and deaf arts conference makes us and other disabled and deaf people feel unwelcome, if it puts us under pressure to adapt to ableist plans and schedules, and if accessibility is just this afterthought rather than an asset, how does that limit our capacity to build communities, to share our art, our thinking, our practices on our own terms? In our experiences, conferences are often planned with non-disabled hearing audiences in mind. And just hiring an interpreter or leaving small spaces for wheelchair users will never be enough to make disabled and deaf people feel truly welcome at an event. So during our original planning for the conference, which should have happened last year as an on-site event at Ufe Studios, which is a large studio space here in Berlin, we came up with this idea of creating this room together as part of a safer space for disabled and deaf people on the first day of the conference. So we basically wanted to create a conference where, for example, wheelchair users could choose to be wherever they wanted to be in that room, or where me and others who would use beanbags to access the conference would not be cooped up in this tiny space between chairs with no view of the speakers on stage. We really wanted to create a space where such ableist expectations of how a conference audience should look like, should behave, should move through the room, are no longer prioritized. And yeah, we couldn't do this now in this pandemic times, but if you now heard this and think this is something you would like to do at the next conference you will organize, please take this idea. I would really love to finally attend as a guest such a conference where this is possible. But with our invitation to this digital space, we hope, of course, to keep some kind of the spirit of opening up a space that actually welcomes us all.
Just a brief note on our curating of public and safer spaces. The safer spaces exist so that we might feel unrestricted by having no need to explain ourselves or our access needs, and to know that we will be understood and held by those with shared lived experiences, even across our many differences. We choose the term safer space rather than safe space to acknowledge that no space is free of potential discrimination or conflict. The public sessions exist to invite others into our thinking and practice, and to acknowledge the important relationships we share across multiple groups and communities. We have consciously curated these 5 days to be led by deaf and disabled artists and contributors. This choice is informed by our experience of encountering non-disabled people speaking for and about us in academic and artistic contexts. We always knew, Noa and I, in our very early conversations when this was going to be a live event. These conversations always happened in hotel rooms, in bed, sometimes with ice cream. But we always knew that we wanted to invite Carrie Sandahl to contribute to this conference. As a prominent thinker, scholar, and activist, Carrie's work has and continues to strongly influence both myself and Noa. We are delighted to be sharing this part of the conference with her. This part of the session will be Noa, Carrie, and myself in a somewhat informal and experimental conversation. And we will then open up the space for questions and discussions. So at this point, I would like to welcome and introduce Carrie Sandahl. Carrie, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Am I on the spotlight yet? Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm Carrie Sandahl. I use she, her pronouns. I am a middle-aged white woman wearing glasses. I have blondish hair, wearing a sleeveless gray t-shirt, and I am propped up in my bed here in Oak Park, Illinois, with pillows behind me. What you can't see is that I have a big purple cast on my right leg, because I'm just 3 weeks out of very major orthopedic surgery. And that was one of the influences for our experimental format for a keynote today. So I feel very privileged to be able to participate. And I also feel a bit vulnerable, to be honest with you, as I think we're not often invited to bring our private selves into public space, to present ourselves as anything other than super crip. So Thank you for this opportunity. I'm going to learn a lot from just the effort of trying this.
Thank you, Carrie. And thanks as well for kind of acknowledging the vulnerability that I think lots of us are probably experiencing. So before we kind of get into our discussion and provocations to each other, Noa and I really, and Carrie, wanted to share a bit of thinking around this idea of cripping the keynote and what that means to us. So originally, when we wanted to invite Carrie, we, I think, imagined that it would be Carrie speaking on her own in a traditional normative format. And then the more we spoke, the more Noa and I realised that we had something of a golden opportunity, particularly as we moved into a digital space, to resist the traditional model of one human keynotes and to highlight the power of deaf and disabled crip thinkers in conversation with each other. So what does cripping the keynote mean to us, or what do we think it means to us? We've thought about what elements of a keynote should be or could be cripped. Is it only ever one human, usually standing, usually speaking, or could the keynote reflect our reality? A keynote from bed seemed like a good place to start. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Carrie.
All right, so in thinking about how a keynote could be cripped or what elements could be cripped, I have already mentioned the idea of mixing public and private space and how often that inability to be in public from a private space, which the pandemic has already shattered for us, but how much that keeps people from joining conversations, especially if you're not able to travel. And, you know, so distance, stamina, issues of pain, concepts of professionalism, I think needed to be cripped. I'm admiring Noa's beautiful lipstick, but honestly, I didn't have the energy to do anything other than how I'm showing up today. And that was really difficult for me to think about, well, am I going to be considered professional? And I just thought that was something that came to mind, because I think we often are performing an academic self, and part of our performance is our costume, our makeup, how we choose to perform ourselves. Also, there's when I was so disappointed when this surgery came up for me and I didn't think that I would be able to do this keynote, I experienced that as a loss, since it was something I was so looking forward to doing. So the idea of you're either 100% there and present and you have gained something, you've gained contacts, you've gained some credit, I guess, on your CV or your professional life at your institution, or opportunities to meet people, to visit. I was feeling that deeply as a loss. And so getting to think about this new format as a new way to gain something, I think has been tremendous. So I think this idea of who gains, who loses, our sense of internalized ableism, which I'm feeling when I was considering how to show up today, whether some of my own thoughts on how I should be present reflected some internalized ableism. Also the idea of coherence. Is one thing I was thinking, could I write something and be coherent and present it? Kind of something that we needed to crip, that maybe we could be more informal and free flowing, especially since I am on quite a few pain medications. So keep that in mind. I have a bit of an altered state of consciousness. So all of those things about how we expect ourselves to show up, how we think other people will expect us to show up, what we think is coherent, what we think is professional, I think all those things could and should be cripped.
I think that's definitely something I'm relate to, especially in reference to being horizontal and being horizontal a lot. And that is actually something I also experienced a lot, that like even once at the Disability Studies conference, I was told that wanting to be horizontal as an audience member was not a real access requirement, because it's just not fitting into the format of the conference, into the idea how even the audience of a conference, of an academic conference, should look like. Yeah, that being horizontal seems, yeah, like already the most unprofessional thing. And whether you wear lipstick or not. And it's not like I don't feel it in myself sometimes. I think we all have also like this, what is often called like internalized ableism. So these thoughts that, yeah, even that I actually wanted to sit in bed today. And then I had to realize, okay, I will actually not be able to sit during our conversation. But it kind of was in my head, and it then still needed to do some kind of, yeah, like replanning and rethinking. Yeah. And I think it's also like, especially the format of the keynote is often like so much pressure on one person and not like sharing responsibility. And I think that's something why actually this trialogue, this conversational keynote between the three of us, is actually fitting into this conference, because I think how Kate and I tried to do our curatorial work was also a lot about sharing the responsibility and not putting all the pressure, but then maybe also not all the credit on the CV on one person. So it always has both sides, I think. But yeah, I think when we want to imagine, especially spaces for communities, then I think thinking more in pairs, in trialogues, in groups would be actually a way forward.
I think it's really, I love that all three of us have, in a different way, raised this inner question of, is this okay? Is this all right that I'm not doing the traditional? Is it still a keynote? Is it still an appropriate opening? Where, is it rigorous? All these words that we kind of live with and work with all the time, which I think is really fascinating. And I know Noah knows this and has experienced it from curating with me, that I have a strong connection with the notion of mess in my life and in my work, and I'm really curious. I'm consistently curious about wondering what mess is, and turning that from being a negative need to tidy up, and actually what is it to be in mess, in messiness, in between spaces. And I think, Carrie, you nodded to this really interestingly, that when we have a conversation in this way, in all its vulnerability, I think there's a new knowledge, or it makes space for different ways of thinking that perhaps aren't all this, that space is not always there in more formal conversations that right now might feel messy. But I think these are often the conversations where, for me anyway, kind of new ideas and new thinking comes in. I'm going to do that annoying thing of moving us on, but if you don't want to be moved on,
Well, I was going to pick up the ball there, because the idea of mess, I think I characterize it as perhaps incoherence. I think a lot about my own scholarship has been about putting things in categories. Like, this is disability art, this is not disability art, or this is what this type of dance is, this is what that type of dance is, and figuring out ways to distinguish one thing from the other. So this is kind of the antithesis of that. And I guess I have that impulse to category still. And we'd had some conversations before the keynote today, and we were talking about, what does disability community mean for us? So you've created this very intentional space for disabled and deaf artists. I was really curious about how you were thinking about community, how you were thinking about disability identity as you were putting together this event, but also the conference as a whole.
Noa, do you want to go? What do you?
I think you can start.
Thank you. That it's such a hard question to answer without being messy, because I think I mean, speaking personally, I came to a disabled identity quite late in my life, and I came even later to a crip identity. So in one way, I'm still finding out. When you talk about community, I think that's something that it's something, it's very hard to explain because it's something I feel. I know when it's there. I know that something happens when I'm in spaces with other disabled people, with other crips, whether that's in an academic setting or in a practice setting. There's a feeling that's very hard to describe and it's something for me about stepping back from the exhaustion of explaining or representing or performing, and more that's a really tangible feeling for me, that it's that relief of being in a space of not having to explain or not. And of course, as we talked about at the beginning, that these things are present in all spaces. It's probably never possible to be totally free of this sense of performing, but yeah. And I think, I mean, Noa, do you want to step in, and then we can talk about identity also? I'm aware of kind of going on and losing Carrie's question around disability community.
Yes, I think for me or for us, it was also important, because I would always say, of course, I say we all said that in the beginning, we used different words, but we said we identified ourselves as disabled at crib, but at the same time, I think in the same way you describe it, I of course also often have these thoughts about my own identity, where maybe not feel completely settled or not completely part of a community. And so I think that at least is our way of trying, or I think this opening is also a good way to say this again, that that we specifically want to make space, especially in the safer spaces, where we write that there are specifically for disabled and deaf artists, but also for people who might use other words to describe themselves, like, for example, chronically ill or mad, and maybe also to say, yeah, for people whose disabilities aren't visible in the first moment that other people look at them, and also people who might struggle with where they fit, but people who might experience ableism in this extent that we do as disabled people, even though they might not have yet come to terms with what disability means for them. So I would say this conference, and specifically also the safer spaces that are a bit smaller spaces to actually, come together as community, are for those people who might be unsure about things and who might struggle with them words, or like with belonging to community. Because for me, it was experiencing disability community that made me come to terms, in some ways at least, with my own identity. So without experiencing it and without other people who might have done disability arts longer, felt longer part of communities, saying, I'm actually seeing you as part of the community, gave me then the possibilities to actually experience what disability community might mean to me, and what I might also, how I might also benefit from that. Because I think that's something very specific that maybe all of us went through our life, but often maybe still now, is this thing that people, that, yeah, we get often approached in a way that, yeah, but why do you want to separate? You don't need this. We can just be all in community. But yeah, I think there's something very specific about these spaces that I think, Kate, you put in great words when you talked about, yeah, less work of explaining, and then having more space for actually other conversations or for other sorts, like, for example, finding out about your own sense of disability identity.
And there's something that it's making me think that, you know, from being very young, I have this association with being the only one, whether that's in my family or in a school situation, and really holding that thing of and then not having a strong sense of what a disabled or crip identity could be. And I just really want to echo, Noah, what you're saying, that for me, this sense of disability community, and I think I hope we've acknowledged this in the safer and public spaces. When I talk about disability community, it's very broad for me, and it's fluid and it changes. It's not one place that I go into. So it can be virtual, or it can be physical, it can be a feeling of community. But all those spaces really shape and sculpt my changing sense of what my identity is.
This is Carrie again. We had a comment that said it would be awesome if the speakers could make shorter sentences. So I'm going to give that a go. One of the things I've been thinking a lot about lately, as the arts organization that I co-direct, called Bodies of Work here in Chicago, we've been doing strategic planning and rethinking a lot of our foundational premises about who we are. And so what I have been challenged on is whether identifying as disabled is a prerequisite for being in disability community. And I think that I found the identification very empowering for myself. Identifying as crip, also very empowering, but it has also come to my attention more and more about that ability to identify is coming from a place of privilege as well. There's something different at stake for me as a middle class white woman with certain credentials, academic safety in my employment, for instance, makes the stakes different for me than it might for someone from a different community to publicly claim a disability identity. So I've been thinking more about coalition building, working between groups, perhaps even letting more loose what disability is, or maybe not even always thinking about disability identity as prerequisite for disability community. This is it. This is the mess. This is the mess, Kate, that you've invited. I feel more and more that as we want to move to more equitable disability art spaces, we need to reckon with the ways that sometimes our identifications can exclude people that we want to be in conversation with. And I don't think that there's a solution to this, but I think it's always a goal, always an effort to rethink who we are. And that's hard, right? Because it's something that I have kind of built my career on and built my own identity on, to think about making that more porous to create other opportunities.
I really, that resonates with me a lot, and it's something, like you say, I don't think there's a solution, but for me it's a really ongoing question, that when I am experiencing or aware of my privilege, I'm really trying to stay with the question of why am I being invited in, without letting go of my sense of my own practice or value, but to somehow acknowledge this. I think this word porous is really, really good, to acknowledge a lack of porousness. I don't know what it is. That it's a hard one to articulate, but I suppose I am aware that within my crip physicality, my experience, I am easy to invite into spaces because of my privilege. And I think I want to really ask the question about how we open that up. So really thank you for raising that. And I think it's ongoing, but it feels really important.
Yeah, maybe I come from a little bit different point than the two of you, because on the one side, of course, coming with a lot of privilege, like you put into words, but on the other hand, I did make that experience that for a long time I didn't feel I have the right to identify as disabled, because of my disability being, maybe, I don't like that invisible disability thing too much, but yeah, I was not the person having the wheelchair or missing one hand. I was the person who was in pain or is in pain and is in fatigue, for example, or who thinks in a neurodiverse way, but that is not the things that is most commonly recognized as disability. And I think that's what I experience definitely for non-disabled people, but also sometimes from disabled people, like the story that I told about, where I was told that lying down was not an access requirement. That was not non-disabled people who were telling me this. This were other disabled people who organized an event. So, and that maybe also comes to my identifying, like kind of like in double way, so that I said at the beginning that I identified as a disabled chronically ill person, because for me that also speaks to a certain way I experience disability due to chronic illness that might be different from other disabled people. Yeah, so I think that, and that's just one way of how I think broad our community can be, if we let it be a broad community. And of course, that brings challenges with it. So for example, then you have lots of access requirements at the same time that might also be in conflict with each other from time to time. Yeah, but I really think these are a kind of space that Kate and I wanted to invite to when we created the conference.
Yeah, well, this is Carrie again. when we had our pre-conversations, the reason why this question came up in the first place is we were thinking about curation. What the work that I do here in Chicago and your work planning this conference, we need to have these terms if you're organizing around disability community or disability art, then to think about what that is, because as curators, you need to make choices, right? About what is professional or what is community or what is disabled, that otherwise that's what curation is, right? Is making choices. So maybe we can move into our idea about how disabled people make community and are in community, as you created this intentional experience for us with the people and the topics and ideas that you've chosen.
This is Kate speaking again. So, Carrie, is your provocation around how we understand community, or
Right. Yeah, given kind of the unsettling we've done around disability identity and disability community, how did those sort of foundational questions inform your curatorial practice? So when the two of you were putting together the conference and the experience that will be going on over the next 5 days, how were you thinking about community and what spaces and where are the spaces?
I think, Noah, if you don't mind, because I think, and I think this is maybe quite typical and not just around our communities. I think, I remember early conversations between myself and Noah, and it was kind of, who do we know? And actually, beyond that, then how do we move beyond that? Where can that lead us into? And I think what was really enjoyable is that actually, I can only speak for the UK, but many disabled academics and artists share the same network. So what was really interesting immediately is that Noah and I, although are connected across some networks, actually have a connection with multiple other communities. So there's already been this intersecting of people who know people who kind of uh, yeah. I think it's an ongoing question for me in a curatorial process about the difference between an open call and a curated conference like this one. That actually, of course, and I think it's really good to acknowledge, when we shift away from an open call curation, we are going, there is a potential of missing certain people. However, when we work with an invited curation, it firstly, and this has been very present for me in the pandemic, it relieves or reduces the labour of a call out, of kind of selling yourself or responding to. So I think there's something that is interesting me about those two ways of working, and I wonder whether if we did this again, there might be space to do a little bit of both. I think in practical terms, Noah and I across the 5 days have, I mean, I've mentioned this already, we very consciously wanted it to be led by deaf and disabled contributors. And very early, I mean, actually, I think, to be completely honest, I have to credit Noah, because we had early on, we had many conversations about the safer spaces. And I initially had some anxiety, and I think it goes back to your point, Carrie, about I can't remember your exact words, but the kind of something around the sorry, language is failing me, the proper way of being in these spaces. And I think I had an anxiety of claiming a disabled only space. And Noah and I shared some really interesting conversations around that. So that learning has also been part of the curatorial process, that we've shared that with each other. And now I'm so glad that was the direction. I know it's the right, absolutely the right direction. Noah, do you want to speak to that at all?
Yes, maybe another element that I think we talked a lot about, of course, I think we never really thought about doing an open call, because at least for me, it always was a question of, for me, curation is not just, so I think a lot about not only what could be curation for disability arts, but what could truly be an anti-ableist way of curating. But for me, that also has a lot to do with accountability for the spaces you create. And that is sometimes at least linked to me to the question of, okay, who do we invite in this space? Like you said, Kate, it was very clear from the beginning that we wanted Carrie for the keynote and not another person. And I think there were definite reasons for that. And just maybe to do it with this example, that there are people who are prominent keynote speakers, or also artists who get asked a lot to be part of such events, that are very good at presenting, but not very good at listening and having conversations and being interested in community. So I think that was one thing that led our thinking about who we wanted to be here, that it's not only artists or thinkers we are basically looking up to for their work, but where we also thought, okay, this person would be really great to create a space that is actually an inviting space, and not a space where you just think, okay, this person is so brilliant, but I could never imagine talking to that person because that person feels so far away, or something like this. But I think one thing that we did, and I'm glad that we did it, is that there are events in the conference that are not curated by us. So for example, we have the program on Friday that is curated by two brilliant deaf artists, Rita Mazza and Cassandra Wedel. So we choose them to curate it, but then they decided what deaf artists they want to bring in. Or there is another conversation where we also approached one artist and asked this person, okay, you're bringing this topic to the project, but who is actually the person you would like to be in conversation about this topic? So it's not like we paired the two of them, but they paired themselves. So I think these are, some steps that we took to make it not only our own, however you want to call it, bubble network, the people that are on our radar, that's the word, radar, but also, have spaces where we invite people, basically.
This Kate speaking again. I just want to add a little bit, Noah, because I'm almost changing my mind, because something when you were speaking just reminded me that I think often in normative conferences or events, the presence of the disabled person in the room is often not carefully curated. It might be to fill one particular panel, or to be one person on a panel, or it has felt like that to me at points in my career. And I think one thing that has been that has really been there for me in this conference is that we haven't, obviously we know that many of these, not all the people that we've invited, some of them are new to us, but for example, Joe and Sindri are opening tomorrow's day, and we have curated them into that part of the conference because they will speak about artistic kinship in a way that is rich and knowledgeable, and that is really important to me, that we make a space for these contributors to speak about their practice and to highlight and privilege the depth of knowledge and experience that exists in these contributors. It feels quite important to add that.
This is Carrie speaking. What I enjoy is having the opportunity for us to build ideas with one another, rather than, I think at a lot of conference ideas, you bring new work and you get feedback from people. But what I've noticed is 9 out of 10 times there's very little time for people to exchange ideas. And so you coming more with an idea that's pretty fully formed already. So I've been hearing things already from the two of you that have, got wheels turning in my head. I think during this pandemic time, we've all been thinking about the ways that we have been doing things and ways that we might do things differently, and ways that the new kind of ad hoc solutions that have come up might be better than the ways that we have done them before. I mean, that was one of our questions that we had come up with for each other, of whether, some of this new way of organizing might just be for this pandemic, or are there things that you two have noticed in this planning process or in your other work that you would like to see carried into non-pandemic times, which I'm hoping there is such a thing.
I think I mean, not specifically, I mean, it relates to the conference, but I've literally in the past couple of weeks really had a very tangible sense of quite an aggressive push to get back to some kind of normality. And I'm seeing my disabled peers and myself and just gradually kind of having less space to have the conversations that I was having during the many lockdowns. I think in relation to this conference, Noah and I have really consciously tried to be very gentle in our invitation to people, and actually we have kept deadlines relatively soft where we can. We've been flexible with moving meetings with each other and with the people we're working with where we are able to do that. And they're things for me that I think the pandemic has made it much easier for people to state that as an access need. And that's something I would really like to hold on to, that we don't suddenly go back to a space of being embarrassed by saying fatigue is going to make me miss that deadline, and I don't want that to make me seem unprofessional. I would like it to be understood, or these are this is what I need in order to come and perform in your venue or speak at your conference. And that I would really like that to continue. My slightly cynical fear is that right now, in this moment, there's a lot of work to do to hold on to what we've you talked about gain, Carrie. I really like that what actually we've gained from these strange ways of connecting without connecting. And I think there's work to be done to hold on to that.
And maybe that's something that sounds contradictory at first, but what, of course, in the moment when we received these emails or these calls, I was, of course, a bit sad, but I would definitely like to create spaces where artists feel that they are allowed to cancel if it gets too much. So we had actually quite a few artists who canceled on being part of the conference. Also, yeah, kind of close to the conference, but where, at least from the way how they communicate that with us, had the feeling that they could do with us and that they could be honest about being overworked with, yeah, lockdowns ending, things taking up speed, whatever, their own health, whatever, and that they felt able to say, I would like to be part, but I actually can't because I don't have the energy resources. And I think that's also part of cripping the way we do conferences, is actually making space for changes, including space changes in the program, in the lineup, also on short notice, or that we, and that is definitely something I would like to keep as well, is allowing people to participate in different modes. So we will have some events where people are not present with us at the same time, but have recorded video contributions beforehand. So also, to include people who, for whatever reason, cannot make it to the exact day, to the exact time, to the exact same place that they would need to be part of this conference. So I would say, if you invite a person and the person cannot do the exact thing that you want them to do, always to ask yourself, but if I want the person to be part of this because I think they can contribute something valuable to this, can they contribute it in a way that it's more accessible to them? That there is not this one way of contributing that is worth, and all other ways of contributing are unworthy and therefore shall not be invited, shall not be paid, shall not be recognized.
This is Kate again. I just want to respond, Noa, to that, because I think within that, and Carrie, you've spoken to this a little bit, that there's a precarity in senses of community. So when the people that we'd invited couldn't do it due to various reasons, Noa and I were really conscious of making sure that we were really clear in this isn't the end. We understand, we completely get it, and we will absolutely ask you again, and you ask, this isn't, because I think sometimes identifying as being part of a relatively small community, it can be really frightening to say no, because we sit with that fear of, well, what if I don't get asked again, or what if this means I'm not in the community anymore? So I think we had that in our thinking as well.
Yeah, this is Carrie. This event is the only event in my 12 weeks of medical leave that I didn't cancel. And it was precisely because of your flexibility and your openness into, rethinking what this could be, and also my trust of you, because I have had enough experiences with you to trust that you really mean it. Because I think sometimes people might say that they're open to something different, but they really are expecting something that's very close to your normal mode. And I think that as we're learning more and having more experiences with these alternative ways of doing things, we'll build more trust with one another. And if people see other artists and scholars taking risks, doing something different that perhaps they'll feel more comfortable taking risks themselves. And I appreciate that. And I hope that throughout the next 5 days, people will feel like they can hop in on these conversations and take some risks as well. And, when risks happen, sometimes there are going to be things that, maybe weren't such a great idea, and that's okay too. I think that that's hard for me to release perfectionism. That's part of my internalized ableism, because one of the ways that I have been able to survive in this profession is by working so hard to make everything the very best I can, or even better than someone who might not be disabled. Like I've felt so much pressure over my entire life to not show my weakness, or to not show that I need anything, as much as I've been in this community. And I just think that it's good to just acknowledge it out loud, because I think as much as we are part of this community, it's very, very hard to distance yourself from those kind of ableist expectations. It is internalized, but I think also the times when we try to shake it, we get enough pushback that it kind of puts us back in line. So that'll be interesting to see how things unfold.
I think maybe I jump in here. I think we touched on a lot of questions we talked about in our pre-conversation. There would be also some question we could do, but I think we are also kind of at the way of, okay, but how do we want to be spaces to be? Like, how do we want them to be now, not only after the pandemic, and maybe also what would be our wishes for disability arts communities in the future? So yeah, maybe each of us could say what they have as wishes for the future, and then we could open up to the audience, actually, because I think I would really like to hear from them if they have anything that came to their mind while we were speaking that they wanted to share or that they wanted to ask. And while the two of you can think about your wishes for the future of disability arts community, of us gathering, I would just make sure to read out the part of the access note again, to explain to people how they can contribute if they want. So if you want to make a contribution, ask the question either in sign language or spoken language. You can draw attention to yourself with the raise hand feature, and you will find that on the bottom right of your screen under reactions. And the keyboard shortcut to raise your hand is Alt-Y. Or if you are accessing this meeting with your phone, you can dial the keys *9. If you raise your hand, we will then let you enter the discussion via audio and video. But please be aware, if you want to contribute a question this way and raise your hand, then your audio and video will be part of the recording. But of course, you can also ask questions without being recorded. And the way to do is to post a written question in either English or German in the chat. If you contribute a German question, I will translate it. Yes, and of course, we will read out English questions if they're coming in the chat so that everyone can hear them. So you can already start to raise your hand and put your questions in the chat while I ask Carrie and Kate, what are you dreaming of when you think about the future?
For me, I maybe to be predictable, I would hope that I'd hope they have room for the mess, because within that, for me that speaks to not having to pretend, or just to acknowledge that there is mess. There's mess in language. There's mess in the point that Carrie makes around identifying our own vulnerability at the same time as living with our internalized ableism and our sense of having to be better than, and these are messy feelings, or messy situations. And I think, yeah, my wish would be that those spaces can be porous, to steal from Carrie, and fluid, and messy, and within that, the categories and the categorizations can also be made room for.
Yes, to all of those things. This is Carrie speaking again. I think at this stage in my career, I am wanting to see and know more people and see who's emerging and who wants to be part of this conversation. And that's why I'm loving being part of this conversation and this event, wanting to know, as we can become more porous, or as we open up our thinking more about what disability is, or think more in coalition rather than in maybe a more stricter sense of disability or deaf identities. What's next? I'm just so excited to see what people are going to be bringing to the conversation, and I hope that my big hope is that we don't become strict gatekeepers. I hope that we can always be open to criticism in a way that's generative, and hear each other's differences, or recognize each other's differences and learn from them rather than let them divide us. And yeah, I think that mess can feel very challenging and can feel a bit defeatist sometimes. But if we can, like you said, be gentle with each other, and allow for those differences to inform you, and allow yourself to change and grow, that's what I'm hoping for our community.
That sounds really nice. More coalitions, more mess. I think that would make a great motto. I am just looking. I'm not seeing yet raised hand.
How about you, Noah? What's your dream?
Oh, damn it. Yes, yeah, I think also to make space for the difficult conversations and not shying away from them, because I think, yeah, a broad sense of community and coalitions does need that space. And especially taking the time for those conversations, and yeah, for those exchanges that we actually need to build communities, to broaden communities, is a very important thing. And also that we don't, I think it's really easy to sometimes sorry, mess of words in my head. It's very easy to be tempted by this ableist thing of wanting things happen very fast and making them look very easy. But I think the things we deal with, and that the thing that disabled and deaf people are often expert, things like accessibility are not easy. if you want to do them right. They can be complicated and they can be messy and they can need time to figure out. So yeah, a bit more sense of let's take the time together to get this right in a way where we can still make mistakes, but we also can be accountable for these mistakes and learn from these mistakes. Yes. And now I see things popping up in the chat, so we'll just have a quick look. So we have first 2 people who said no questions, but thanks and gratefulness for what for the questions, ideas, and thoughts we shared, which I feel is very nice. And another person who said that they are a bit too fatigued and brain foggy to actively take part, but also wanted to express their gratitude for this space and that they feel very welcome and included. Maybe just to add from another person who is often very fatigued, this is very welcome. So I think maybe also for the whole conference, you can just be here and lie down and listen. You don't have to take part in an active way. You are already part when you just take your energy to share this space with us. I think this is enough, as much as we also value when people contribute and discuss with us and critique us and bring their own thoughts. It's also just fine to be in this space with us. So just another thank you, and another person saying that it spoke very much to them, which is very nice, but maybe still asking people for their own thoughts or also their own question. I mean, this is the perfect space to ask Carrie Sandahl a question if you always wanted to ask Carrie Sandahl a question.
I'm so glad you said that, Noah. I was just about to say to go into like.
I mean,
No, I'm scared. This is Carrie. What are they going to ask?
But I also think, just to echo Noah's thinking, it doesn't have to be a comment around community. It can be any question to Carrie or any of us. Don't feel restricted by the questions that we've looked at.
Yeah, this is Carrie. I have a question for anybody out there, for you too. Because now that I'm thinking about what would I dream for disability arts, I have this vision that I don't know how it would be to implement and what the different nuances are for different countries. But I would love to see even more experimentation around accommodations as aesthetic, and how we build, how we take our differences and coming together to create new forms and new ideas from all of our own perspectives. And that's the work that's been exciting me the most. And I'd like to see less of a distinction between service providers and artists. I want to see like cooperatives of ASL or sign language interpreters and audio describers as part of the art making process. Now, I have this idea that there could be more artistic collaborations between the different communities.
Yeah, I think I can totally relate to that. That, yeah, we definitely need to see more of this work. And I know that making a difference as a project is also dedicated to take on these conversations in the next 2 years. And especially also the perspective that artists as experts of the art, and I mean, artists are also going to the theater, so they also, I mean, they know about how to make art, but they also know what works for them as audience members and maybe what works not for them. So also taking very serious that the artists themselves are also like perfect experts of audio descriptions if you take blind and visually impaired artists, and that we definitely need to see more work in that way. I mean, I'm wondering what Kate has to say, because we're having this 3 national thing here, and of course from the perspective of Germany, where I would say we're just starting to develop these potentials. Of course, we often look to the UK and think, oh, could we please have a little bit more of that here?
Yeah, no, I think there's 2 things I would like to say to that. Firstly, I think there is some interesting collaborative work happening in the UK about thinking about bringing communities together, but in a creative way, thinking about how art can intersect and speak to different areas, to shift away from the kind of icon of the disabled performer, and that I think there's something in this notion of collaboration that really shifts that. And actually, I'm going to do this, even though it'll make them uncomfortable, because I think there's a few colleagues here. So at the research centre for dance that I'm based at, and I think this is where kind of it's echoed from performance, but I'm starting to really see a shift from work that was undertaken by non-disabled scholars or thinkers, and they were exploring into the experience of disability. And there's so much more collaborative research now that that brings in there's some fascinating work around AI and all things that I'm always scared to abbreviate because I get them wrong, but that it's very rich in this diversity of genuinely wanting to bring in different experiences, different physicalities, different ways of being in the world, and not from a curiosity point of view, not from I'm looking at you, what can I find out? And that's exciting to me. And I think artistic practice and research continues to be really exciting to me.
So we came to the point, some people even said, thank you. I will not maybe read all of them out, because I finally see that we have some questions and I don't want us to miss those. So there is Martin contributing and telling us about organizing theaters and festivals from and with, I would now translate it, people with learning disabilities. So the question is around that, of course, the way we have this conversation is a very intellectual form of exchange and conversation. And so how we can include people with learning disabilities more in such formats. So maybe I can start it. I have to say, very honest, that I am often not working with artists with learning disabilities. So I'm being very honest that is a field that I do have less expertise on than other people in this room might have. And I think that's also very important to acknowledge, especially because if we say now the disability community, or all people who are perceived disabled, who experience ableism, the community is just so big that often you cannot be the expert on everything. And that is also important to be very honest when you can't. It was, I think at the very beginning of curating this conference, it was a question that we talked about, and we did let it go for this conference because the way Making a Difference was funded, because before Kate and I came in to do this conference and before I started to work for Making a Difference, it was very clear that it is a project that is for basically making offers for people with physical disabilities and blind and deaf people. So it felt a bit like, okay, we could try to change it just for this conference, but maybe that also wouldn't be the right offer. Like I said, very aware that I'm not the best person to speak to this issue because I neither have the lived experience nor lots of experience in collaborating with disabled people who live with a learning disability.
I think my first my first response to that would be that there needs to be more research, more thinking, more exploration from more people about why this quite tangible segregation exists, how it has existed historically. Because I would agree, Noah, that it's as someone with a lived experience of physical disability, it's not an area of expertise. But I would really like to talk more about, and I'm thinking about Carrie's point, is one of the signifiers of a conference a certain vocabulary or a certain way of speaking? What would it be to have and again, I'm referring to a lack of expertise because I don't know, but what would it be to speak to people with expertise and lived experience to find out how these events could be accessible? I think I think it's almost like we need to go back into what causes the segregation, where that resistance is, and then kind of, like you've quite rightly said, Noah, it's good to acknowledge a lack of expertise, because when you do that, you can then look to experts, and then you do things with sensitivity.
Yeah, this is Carrie. Sorry, am I moving my computer around? I'm getting uncomfortable. I'm seeing some exciting work coming from my students, actually. And I think that this question has been one my students have been posing to me for a number of years. And it really points to, I think, how the disability art movement, at least in the United States, was not inclusive of people with intellectual disability. And there were a number of reasons for that are very materialist, really. Part of it is the way we have been segregated from one another in educational settings, in arts-based settings, the lack of access people with intellectual disability have to training opportunities. And there's also the issue of gatekeepers to those communities that have made it difficult to collaborate, because a lot of times there's barriers to connecting with people with ID without going through guardians or other people that have to mediate those experiences. So there's those practical issues, but also I'm seeing some really great work again on in the place of my students who've been working to create new forms based on lived experience of people with intellectual disability, instead of providing access to even disability art forms that are emerging. So creating collaborations in which something new can emerge. So I'm not sure if I'm specifically getting to the question that was asked, but more to say that we have to address some of these structural barriers but that have been put between our different communities. And then we also need to be open even more to ways that people's differences can change process, can change what it is we're expecting to create even. So I'm excited about those collaborations too. And I think people, at least here in the United States, are starting to tackle those barriers more, and hopefully we'll see it happening more throughout the community. Say a couple other questions.
Yes, I just want to add one thing to the gatekeepers thing, because it just hit me when you said that, because if I have to be very honest, one thing for me is not only the lack of expertise, but actually the harm that I experienced by gatekeepers that I'm afraid of when interacting with learning disabled people through the gatekeepers I have to go through to actually get in contact with them. So I think these, and maybe that's something where I just have to say, okay, I have much more privilege, so I have to find a way to deal with that, even if it in the first moment might be harmful, or maybe then I cannot do this alone. I have to do it with a group of other disabled people, so that we actually can find a way to deal with the gatekeepers and to actually create a space together, and basically join forces in trying to create a space that actually welcomes learning disabled people. So that's just a reflection where I realize that on a very personal level, that is also part of my resistance, is actually the own trauma that I inherited from being in the world as a disabled person and being confronted with gatekeepers in the medical system and the social system, that then sometimes makes it harder to reach out to other people who are still very much more confronted with those gatekeepers. But maybe that also implies some kind of, I'm not sure if responsibility is the right word, but like being more aware of my own privilege and how to use it, finding better strategies, how to use my own privilege in these situations. We got a question from lovely Nina Mühlemann, who will also be part of the conference at the closing of the conference on Sunday. And the question is, I love the idea of quote unquote more mass, but also wonder whether mass and access are somewhat contradictory in a practical sense. So how can we navigate that?
This is Carrie. That's a great question. One thing that I've experienced in this vein is making sure that there is consent from people who are participating in a messy process. I've been in situations where the artists participating have been working with audiences and want to try something new with access, but then audiences coming may not know that experimentation is what's happening. So there's an expectation that they're going to come to an event and have a certain now I'm starting to lose words too, have certain service providers or professional service providers who might be working in a particular way, and then they show up and it's like, oh, we're going to do something experimental with access. So I really like Nina's question, because as we're thinking about spaces that might be more messy, we need that accountability, as Noah was talking about, but we also need to make sure that people are consenting. Because having a stable form is also a form of access. People knowing what to expect, people feeling safe because they know that their access needs will be met in ways that they're used to, even if we want to challenge them. So that's always great to keep in mind. I love that question. I don't have an answer. I'm just elaborating on it. I can see the practical conflicts that can arise. I've experienced them.
Yeah, maybe it's a bit about, if we want to go deeper into the mass, then we need kind of like collective models of accountability and of, yeah, having an agreement to support each other in the mass. And that again takes time building this kind of collective collaboration, coalition, and actually building trust, because I think, yeah, you have to be able to trust to go with other people into a messy situation. You have to trust these people.
This is Carrie. That's right. That's why I consented to this experimental form of Keynote, because I trust you two, and I thought it would be fun to jump into the mess with you, but I don't think I would be likely to do that with people I didn't already trust or know. So that's going to take time to build those coalitions and networks of trust. Were you going to say something, Kate?
Just really there's two things coming up for me there. Firstly, I agree that it's a really wonderful question, and it is making me question my own sense of how comfortable I am in mess, and actually how much of my comfort around mess is something of a resistance of this is perhaps a different conference subject, but there's something about my perception of my messy body, and actually then I kind of want to be in this space of acknowledging mess in this kind of philosophical but also practical way, but within that, actually there's perhaps I don't acknowledge the part of me that, well, you said something, Carrie, I was like, oh yeah, that actually it is an access requirement to know that your access needs will be met in the way that you expect them to be met, and I also have that. So it's a really great question and a great reminder, and yeah, I think it's something I want to think about a little bit more. But thank you, Nina, really good provocation.
Yeah, I think we could talk endlessly about that. I just want to contribute what Cassandra Wede, one of our great deaf co-curators, wrote in the chat. Today, someone told me, and this is a quote, "If you feel life is messy, then you will be Messiah." Just want to share the wordplay because it made me laugh. And I think it has something true in, because we fight and do much like owning spaces in all this mess. So I think that's, yeah, great to add to this thinking around mess. And we have also a contribution and question from Nirmala, who wrote, "What could you say to artists who want to prioritize access for themselves and others while making art and performance, but still feel a lot of pressure to succeed? So how can artists avoid letting that pressure influence the work, and by doing that, not addressing their own access needs? So basically, how can disabled artists best deal with pressure, either from internalized ableism or just the expectation that comes along with performing?"
Can I go with that? Just I again, I think this is a great question, and I have encountered it personally, and I see it in the artists that I work with. And I think this is where I've learned so much from you, Noah, and other kinds of other people, that I think for me this is about cripping the frameworks that we exist within, both in terms of internalized ableism and ableism that we encounter, that and that could be as fundamental as the length of a rehearsal day, how long we take for lunch, that everybody takes the same amount of time, that actually we somehow, how do we, that we can even consider cripping what success looks like. Because if we as disabled performers and artists are always trying to make work that is conforming to normative standards of time and what success looks like, whether that's monetized or whether that's amount of performances, I think this situation is going to keep coming up again and again, this exhaustion of a pressure to succeed in a so-called normative framework and holding on to one's access needs. And I mean, this is, I don't want to end on a negative note, but in my career as a dancer, I have seen so many crip artists, disabled performers doing their access needs very privately, very subtly, like hiding them, like hiding exhaustion, hiding pain, and because of this kind of wheel or perception of success and what succeeding and hard work looks like. And it's, in my opinion, it's so unsustainable. So I think not the answer, but I think you use the phrase to deal with it. I think it is about leaning into these communities and making collectivizing our voices, and being in spaces where we are autonomous with, in terms of time and in terms of energy, and just rethinking, turning the whole idea of what work and performing looks like. I'm sorry, I feel quite passionate about that question, so maybe that's not so clear.
Yeah, this is Carrie. I completely agree with you, Kate. I think the pandemic has also brought this just so present. And again, it's my students who have challenged me on this one, of just not doing so many things. And that's been hard for me. I mean, the pandemic has made it very clear that we can't keep doing the same number of things in this different space. Like when we've moved to online, it's a different thing. We can't do things the same way, but now going, as things change and shift again, the pressure to do so many things. Maybe I can just do one thing and do it really well and take the time to explore the kind of questions that we're getting in the chat. What would it really mean to include different people that I'm not used to collaborating with, or what would it mean to incorporate access as aesthetic, or, that I think that we can get more out of each thing that we're doing rather than ticking off so many things. So that's been my challenge too, is just like for this medical leave I've taken, I chose this event as the one thing that I'm doing in these 12 weeks. And I felt a lot of pressure to do a lot of other things. And I think some of it is just letting go of these pressures of productivity and thinking about how productivity differently.
And yeah, at the same time, to say maybe two complicated things about that. I think I'm also passionate about this question because I think there are 2 points where I often feel, especially in the German landscape, quite struggling. The one is if to tell young people, or like people who are not yet established artists in general, regardless of their age, to be very honest about their access needs, because I know that in the German system that can be negative for them. And but in a way, as being like a curator and dramaturg, I can also not lie to them and say, yeah, of course, be very open about your access needs. It won't cost you anything, because it probably will in the moment, unfortunately, like the German art scenes works. And the other one is that, of course, the more you are marginalized, not like more in like oppression Olympics, but of course we all know that if you are white from a very well-educated and rich background, this male person, maybe also with a visible disability, then it will be a lot easier to be honest about your access requirement than if you're a person of color, if you're a queer person, a trans person, a person who is coming from a working class background. You do not have the resources to fall back on if a project fails. Or also that I experience a lot, a person who has access requirements who are not recognized as well as other access requirements, might be due to having access requirements that might not be visible to other people looking at you, because it's not so clear, like, oh, this is a wheelchair user, maybe there shouldn't be steps. That doesn't mean that wheelchair users are not discriminated. They are, but of course, if people look at you and think, yeah, but why you don't look like that, then it's already another level on that. So I think that is also what makes it more complicated for marginalized people to come out as disabled and to come out with their access needs. And that is something we need to keep in mind as well. And maybe to end it on a more positive note is also then bring it back to the idea of disability community, because I would say internalized ableism is so strong. I learned all about my own access needs from other disabled people, not because they were specifically telling me, oh, this is your access needs, I know it better than you, but because I was in community with other people who needed to lie down, who had to rest, who had to use certain medical things to help them to navigate things, whatever. So I would also say, if you want to learn more about how to work, what your access needs are, but also how to do artistic work with your access needs, connect to other people who also have access needs and might have not always the same, but maybe similar access needs, because I think that's what helped me in the past and what still helps me, because I would say I haven't figured out all my access needs yet. That will take some more years.
I just very, very quickly want to acknowledge this last comment from one of our many Connie Volters in the conversation, about, I love this point that success could be about atmosphere and qualities of being in a certain space rather than being looking like what the product is at the end, particularly in relation to performing and making. And that feels so important in relation to work made by crip artists, because I think there still exists a pressure to make either profound work or innovative work. All these words definitely are pop up in the UK funding system. But I think to really acknowledge that success can be like the spaces we create. So really thank you for that. I feel like I sort of want to give Carrie Sandahl the last word of this.
I mean, we have to do some advertising of the rest of our conference.
Of course.
I mean, maybe before, we definitely should thank all the audience members, but also all our team in the background for making this event possible. to Anna and Connie, who were taking care of the Zoom, but also to all our interpreters and captioners, and specifically for Carrie, because I was always like having a little tear in my side eye lying down here when you said that you choose this event and that you trusted us. I think I can speak for both Kate and myself that we are honored and that we are so glad that you choose to be in conversation, and also, at least how it felt to me, in community with us all for this evening.
Well, this is Carrie. Thanks again. Now you're making me get a little tear. It could be the painkillers. I mean, that really is a thing. You know, part of it is how you comport yourself too, right? And this has been so many things that you two have said have hit me at an emotional level too. And I appreciate being able to think and to feel with you and the rest of the folks who are here on this meeting. So thank you.
Thank you.